Today we're going to talk about approaches to managing anxiety. We've talked about the definition of it, the issue of it. We even talked about religion and anxiety. So we're going to just, continue the flow, and we're going to look at ways to manage anxiety. We're going to theoretically build it, and then perhaps later on we're going to, actually do some practices. So today, our goal is to understand, first of all, that anxiety is perpetual and it's installed very early in life. There's a theorist who comes out of the marriage and family literature. He's passed on now, but his name was Murray Bowen. And he gets credit for what we call intergenerational marriage and family therapy, or Bowenian therapy. And his claim to fame is really centered around anxiety. And he actually has a chart, a scale, a 100 point scale that measures levels of anxiety. And when he talks in terms of the issue of anxiety, he points out that it is usually transmitted intergenerationally. And the presenter of the theory in his name, doctor entitled Phil Guerin, says that, you can trace family transmitted anxiety as far back as 10 generations. Now, I've often wondered, how could you do that? Nobody lived that long. But they probably looked at like monarchs, you see, because we are privy to a lot of stories in relation to, say, the kings of England and the queens of England and Spain and, places like that. So we probably, use that as the source in relation to realizing that, the whole concept or the whole issue of anxiety is intergenerational. And that's probably the first thing we want to realize in relation to the theory of anxiety. When we talk about anxiety, another point that Murray Bowen makes is that an intervention relative to anxiety doesn't decrease anxiety. He was pointing out that one can be in therapy for up to 10 years. And the anxiety level, based on the scale that he has from 0 to 100, will go down no more than 2 points. So when we think in terms of anxiety, we're realizing that it is not exogenous, quite honestly. It's really unchangeable. And when you think about it, it's non-clinical, which means that no matter how much talking I do with my therapist, with my social worker, with my priest, with my pastor, with my imam, doesn't matter, anxiety is not going anywhere. However, I might get some insight on how to manage the anxiety, you see. And there lies the key. We don't get rid of anxiety once it's there, but we do learn how to live with it more effectively and how to minimize it. So when we talk about managing anxiety, we're not talking about getting rid of it. We're talking about minimizing it and approaches that we might use in relation to minimizing anxiety. You all probably have heard me talk about pain, avoidance, and pleasure seeking, and how both of those result in what? Anxiety. Well, they do. They do. You see, if I see something as painful, and we know that the ego will drive that perspective, if I see it as painful, I'm going to dread it. And believe me, if I'm dreading something, I'm seeing myself as vulnerable relative to it. So I'm going to dread it, and it's going to cause anxiety. If I see it as pleasurable, yeah, I'm going to pursue it, I'm going to capture it, and then I'm going to dread what? Losing it. And that causes anxiety. So you can't win with judgment. Whether you judge something as good or bad, it's eventually going to result in what? Anxiety. So when we talk about, the whole issue of anxiety, we know that it's ego-driven, and we know that it is a response to a perception of vulnerability. The problem comes when we don't recognize that anxiety has a value. You see, theoretically, you can see anxiety using the metaphor of an alarm clock. You see, anxiety is something that is supposed to be used to sort of like let us know when something's wrong. It lets us know when something's out of sync. And so if we see it as an alarm system, we recognize that when it erupts, we're supposed to stop, take note, and reconcile. We're supposed to evolve. And this is where I think Murray Bowen falls short. I think that he, in his understanding of anxiety, wanted to address only the anxiety. And I think he gives anxiety a little bit too much credit. You see, in my opinion, not just mine, Stephen Stosny and others too, you know, when anxiety erupts, it's a learning opportunity. It's a learning opportunity. When if somebody says something and it rubs me the wrong way and my anxiety, you know, emerges, that's a time for me to question, not the person who said whatever it is that they said, but it's a time for me to question something going on in my life, something going on in my psyche, something going on in my emotional system. I liken our emotional systems as having landing strips. And if somebody says something and it lands on my landing strip, I've got to wonder, why is that landing strip in my emotional system? And this is a way to see ourselves what? Transcending, growing, outgrowing, evolving from what? Anxiety, such that anxiety truly can change and will change if we do the emotional, psychological, and, you know, spiritual work to resolve it. So, Murray Bowen, I kind of take issue with what you're saying. I'm sure that if you're, you know, listening to this broadcast, you're saying, oh, she's probably right. Yeah, I know. So when we talk about the whole concept of anxiety, and we see it as an alarm system, and we see it as what? Giving us tips, instructing us relative to perpetual peace, we recognize that, no, you don't have to be plagued with, you know, always practicing, always breathing, because sooner or later you are going to develop a mindset such that peace is going to be the norm and anxiety is going to be outside of the norm. So when we talk in terms of, you know, the dysfunctionality of anxiety, if we give it a function, then we can manage it and find it useful. So, see anxiety as an alarm clock. See anxiety, say, as an alarm system. When it goes off, it's telling you what? Something's wrong, something's wrong. There's a landing strip that needs to be eradicated. When you and I get upset, when we get offended, when we get concerned, when we are displeased, when we are afraid, terrorized, something's wrong. That's not a normal feeling. I'm going off to let you know what? There is work to do. There's some self-exploration that has to take place. That's why I'm going off. Don't mask me. Don't hide me. Don't muffle me. Resolve me. Do whatever it is that I'm warning you has to be done. Now, here's what usually goes on. When anxiety goes off, oh, we don't like it. Somehow we think anxiety is from hell. And quite honestly, if you misread Scripture, you might think it came from hell. Why? Because all the holy books are what? Telling you not to be anxious. But they don't mean for you to spend your time trying to recognize, you know, the source of the anxiety in order to artificially handle it. They're telling you, recognize the anxiety and do something about the situation. And that's where sort of like my theory sort of rubs against Bill Guerin and Bowen. Because the way they see it, you can't minimize anxiety. And the way I see it, if you put it in its place and you use it like an alarm clock, oh yes you can. You can what? Keep the necessity of the alarm system from going off. If you're living in the wrong neighborhood and people are always messing with your car and your car alarm is always going off, or maybe it's not a function of people. Maybe you're in a windy area and the wind blows the car and the alarm goes off. All you got to do is move the car. All you got to do is put the car in the garage and you've taken care of the alarm system. You've done something about the condition that caused the system to go off. So when my anxiety alarm system goes off, I'm not going to ignore it. I'm not going to muffle it. I'm not going to act like it's from the devil. I'm going to thank God for it, and I'm going to explore the conditions. Why? Because I got to change the conditions. Because what? Evidently the conditions are not conducive to what I have to do. Otherwise my alarm system wouldn't be going off. Yes, anxiety can be minimized when I change the conditions that cause the anxiety. Yep, that's the Marjorie Lewis theory of anxiety, and I like that much better because I do not like the idea of thinking that if my anxiety is high at age 14, by the time I'm 94, it's still going to be high and I have to manage it. I can change my condition. Either I can change my condition or I can change my perspective. Either one will do. Because you see, the alarm goes off when there is an inconsistency between, say, a core value, a core belief system, something that you've grown up with, and a situation. That's one way that the alarm system will go off. So what do I have to do? Either I got to change what I'm doing to fit with my core value or belief, or I've got to change my core value and belief, and in order to what? Celebrate the situation. Well, either one can be changed. Why? Because they're both endogenous. They're both situational. They're both figments of our imagination. My values, my belief systems, my ethics, my morals. We've already talked about the fact that they're not universal. They're not universally held. I have mine, you have yours. I got my opinions, you got your opinions. And you know what they say about opinions? Everybody got one. So they're not universal. They can change. Oh, yes, they can. And so can my circumstances. I can move. I can drop friends. I can add friends. I can get educated. I can change jobs. So you see, my morals, my ethics, my beliefs, and my situation, a physical situation, both can change. So they're both endogenous. And if there is an inconsistency there, the anxiety alarm is going to go off. So all I got to do is change one or the other. I call it reconciling them, and the anxiety alarm will shut off. Now, why would I not be concerned about having to change either one of those? Because they're both learned. And they're both situational, and they're both temporary. Both of them are what? Subject to my life. They're subject to my eternal being. They're subject to the essence of who I am. They're subject to God. They're subject to the divine presence. They're subject to the eternal being. So my values and all of that, driven by my ego. My environmental, physical situation, also driven by my ego. They can change. So if the anxiety is coming up, it's something what? Not fitting. And there are times when the anxiety alarm will ring when my belief system doesn't fit with who I really am. Now that's really, really transcendent. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there because I think that's a whole nother series. I'm talking about anxiety, and I'm talking about how to work it to your advantage. So let's just keep it as a function of our ego. But I'm going to tell you, spirituality, hey, once you step there, you don't even have any anxiety. Before you were born, you didn't know what anxiety was. And after you die, you won't know what anxiety is. It's something here on earth. So let's just deal with the worldly piece. My attitude, belief systems, etc., and my physical condition. When those are inconsistent, I feel anxious. Let me give you an example. When I grew up, my mother and father, grandmother, grandfather, all of them taught me what? Not to have sex before marriage. Now, that was just the message that we got. That was the message we got. Now, I'm not saying that that was the message that we saw, but that was the message that we got. And for a while, we bought into that message. We believed that you were supposed to grow up, get married, and then have sex. And then what happened? You had the 60s. You know, you had the 60s. Now, you want to talk about some whores and some sluts and some pimps. You had those going on. Those of you all who got parents who are in their 60s right now, yeah, I'm going to tell you, Mom and Grandmama was having a good time, and so was Daddy. We really knew how to be whores and sluts. We screwed everything going. Free love, flower children, all of that was going on. So when you really think about it, yeah, people were doing it, but I promise you they were going against core values. And when you talk about people of that era, you realize what? They weren't all that comfortable in what they were doing. You know how I know? Because they had to get high to do it. You see, you didn't have people sleeping around and sleeping with everybody without the aid of alcohol and drugs. And I always maintain, if you got to get high to do something, there's a rub relative to what you're doing and your core value. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to mask it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to go into a mind-altered, mood-altered state. Now, I'm not trying to go evangelical on you. I'm just using that as an example because it's one that's universal and it's one that makes us uncomfortable. And I like making us uncomfortable because we need to recognize that that discomfort has a function. So here, everybody is during the 60s, doing their thing. You know, birth control is out, mini skirts are out. Hey, we can have free love. But we don't have free love without getting high. Why? Because it goes against our core values. It goes against what Grandma taught us. It goes against what Mama taught us. It goes against what Daddy taught us. It goes against what the preacher taught us. It goes against what the teacher taught us. It goes against what everybody taught us. So in order for us to do it, we got to what? Mask that alarm system that's saying what? Bump, 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 inconsistency, no sex before marriage, yet you are doing it. So the only way that this can happen is for us to what? Medicate it, for us to what? Break the alarm system, and that's what we did. Rather than what? Maybe reconciling our core values. I know we didn't reconcile our core values because the very people that were doing their thing in the 60s are some of the biggest, baddest, scariest, abstinence preaching, teaching evangelicals today. If you could have seen them a few years ago, you would never know who they are today. And so, you know, just point in case. Anxiety theoretically has a purpose. It's going to let you know when you are not doing what you believe you should do. And when that alarm goes off, too often we don't want to do the work to reconcile. We don't want to do the work to reestablish our core values, and we certainly don't want to do the work to change our behavior. So instead of that, we turn to different ways of handling things like shopping. Yep. Or like eating comfort foods. You know how you see on TV something goes wrong, somebody's feeling uncomfortable, so they get a gallon of ice cream. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Oh yeah, we have, you know, alcohol, drugs, nicotine, all of that to handle it too. We also have things like gambling. Then we have TV where we can just go off in fantasy land and not even deal with it. You see, anything to which I'm going to be addicted is something that I'm using to what? Mask the alarm system that is motivated or evoked or triggered with my anxiety. I don't feel like doing the work to reconcile my core value system and my behavior. So instead, I am going to shut anxiety down. It's kind of like taking a hammer and using it to break your alarm clock. Rather than getting up and doing what you have to do, you break the alarm clock so you won't have to deal with the reality of what's going on. And so this is why we often say what? Alcohol and other drugs? They're not a problem. They're a symptom. They're a symptom of a problem. And what's the problem? Anxiety. And why is that a problem? Because we are not reconciling what we believe and what we're doing. Now that is Marjorie's theory about anxiety. And you know, I know it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So my message to you is, rather than trying to find ways to reduce anxiety artificially, why not work with anxiety and do the work that anxiety is alarming us to do? If I'm feeling anxious, it's time for me to stop. It's time for me to think through what's going on. It's time for me to perhaps meditate. It's time for me to get into myself to try to figure out, what am I doing that's making me so uncomfortable? But we don't do that. We often project. That person's making me uncomfortable, therefore I need a drink. That person didn't make you uncomfortable. That person offered you discomfort, but you didn't have to receive it. And you know, that's where the concept of taking offense comes. You see, a person can offer you offense, but in order for it to become offensive, you got to take offense. You know, there's an operationality to that concept. So, if I'm offended because I chose to be offended. So rather than having a hard day at work and needing a drink, maybe I had a hard day at work and I need to sit down and think through why that day was so hard. Maybe I need to look at my attitude. Maybe I need to look at my belief system. Maybe I need to look at me to figure out what was it about me that made that day so hard. That's not much fun. That's too much like work. Oh, we'd rather just blame the boss or blame the subordinates or just blame somebody else. We'd rather blame our spouse for bugging us at work. We'd rather do anything than what? Look at ourselves. And therefore, the anxiety and the job that it was supposed to be doing doesn't get to do the work. Why? We don't deal with the problem. Instead, we eat. Instead, we shop. Instead, we drink. Instead, we drug. Oh, and you know what else we might do? We might go to church and holler and scream till our lungs just can't do it anymore. But you know, the problem with any of those is the fact that the problem that caused the anxiety didn't go away. The lack of reconciliation is still what? A lack of reconciliation, which means what? The anxiety is going to come back over and over and over again. Oh, and you know what? Our ways of dealing with it don't improve. And we do more and more and more of the behavior to try to, I'll say, muffle the anxiety. And it takes more and more of the behavior to muffle the same level of anxiety. So here we are, getting caught up in inappropriate responses to anxiety, and these inappropriate responses are learned. It's learned behavior. Somebody taught us how to manage anxiety inappropriately, and it's just unfortunate that most of us don't get an opportunity to learn how to do the work to manage anxiety more appropriately, which means what? Your self-growth, which means what? You learning how to reconcile your behavior with your core values. They have different techniques that you can use to artificially manage anxiety. And this thing called dialectical behavior. You know, I have a way of, you know, just artificially owning the activity and doing things like breathing. I don't have anything wrong. I don't have anything against breathing. I don't have anything against Tibetan bowls. I don't have anything against any of that. But it doesn't get the job done in relation to transcending. But at least we can begin to look at some of those techniques. When I'm dealing with anxiety and I really want to eradicate it, or I really want to cut the alarm off, I've got to do some work on myself. I've got to do work either on my attitude or my situation. When I can do that, there's no need for the alarm to go off. Which means what? Yes, you can reduce anxiety, because anxiety is not a human condition. It is an alarm system to give us insight about our human condition. I like that better because it gives me hope, and it should give you hope too. About what? Anxiety, and about the fact that it does not have to be predominant in your life. Contingency planning, yeah, it has a place, but it's too complicated. I can't remember all those techniques, and learning that behavior can be tiring. However, there are times when I might want a little ecstasy, so I might indulge in some techniques, but the techniques, believe me, if I don't do the work, the emotional and mental work or the physical work, I'm going to have to do the techniques. Oh, and by the way, I can become compulsive about the techniques. Now I'm in no better position than I was when I was drinking. I'm in no better position than I was when I was eating that gallon of ice cream every other day. I'm in no better position than I was when I was shopping at Cherry Creek until I, dropped off the credit rating. So, my point is this. Recognize anxiety as your friend. Learn to embrace the anxiety as an instruction relative to the improvement of your emotional system, relative to the improvement of your physical condition. Use it for what it's supposed to be used for, a way of directing you into a lifestyle that is conducive to perpetual peace. Great peace have they who love the Lord. Great peace have they who recognize anxiety as an alarm system, and they move into a state of being where they can look inside of themselves and they can realize what they have to do to what? Shut the alarm clock off and benefit from it having rung in the first place. That's how I like to look at anxiety. I really would be curious about what you think. And you know, if you have ideas about anxiety and what it really means, I'd love to hear from you. I'm sure that we'll be sharing my email address and my telephone number. I'd love to know your response about this theory, because it is a theory that kind of goes against the grain, but it is a theory that gives us hope. And I'll take hope over techniques to artificially managing any day. So what have we talked about today? We talked about the issue of the ego. We talked about the issue of preoccupation with self. We talked about pleasure seeking and pain avoidance, both resulting in disutility and uncomfort. We've talked about, pseudo ways of sort of minimizing anxiety through alcohol and drugs and fantasizing and amusement and comfort foods and gambling. We've talked about the reality that anxiety can be minimized by reconciling the dissonance between our core values and our actual behaviors. We've talked about the fact that that is not the contemporary understanding of anxiety, but it is just as operational and just as effective as any, and it does give us hope of transcendence. And so I leave you with that concept. I leave you with that hope, because I know that we are better than our decisions and our choices in masking anxiety. You don't want to keep sweeping the issues under the rug. They never go away, and the house doesn't get really clean. So when the alarm system of anxiety goes off, welcome it, appreciate it, do as the kids do, know that it's all good. It didn't come to make you sick. It didn't come to hurt you. It came to alarm you so that you could change, so that you wouldn't be sick, so that you wouldn't be hurt. On that note, I'm going to say goodbye until the next time. And remember, peace is the goal. Anxiety is the directive.